Hello and welcome to the Green Profit Academy Pros podcast. This show digs into the challenges in growing a lawn care and landscape business while maximizing your profit. I'm Christeen Era.
And I'm Steve Bousquet. We are the green industry experts in profit, growth, and leadership.
Hello, Christeen. How are you today?
I'm hanging in there. It's been a year.
Yes, it's been a year for sure.
Been a year.
It's only the middle of April. Yeah, it seems like March. Yep. This week seems to be 2 weeks. Lots going on. Yep. All good, but lots. Yep.
Yeah.
Today's episode, we're going to be focusing on the essential topic that lies at the heart of every business decision: profitability. Specifically, we're going to be laying out the 5 steps to ensure profitability in your lawn care and landscape business. Navigating the competitive lawn and landscape industry requires more than just a green thumb. It demands a keen understanding of knowing how to balance pricing with maintaining healthy profit margins. In an industry where costs of labor, equipment, and materials are constantly on the rise, setting the right price is not just about staying competitive, it's about survival and growth.
Yes. You always do such great introductions, Steve. Good job. All right. So I want to just kind of talk about the purpose of today's episode. So with lawn and landscape business owners navigating through profitability in their business and understanding their financials can be completely overwhelming, and it can be, kind of like a maze where they're like, well, I went this way, I went that way, I ended up here, it wasn't where I wanted to go. And, they're always kind of trying to find the right solution. So in today's episode, we're going to equip you with the knowledge to give you more direction on what to focus on and the tools needed for you to, deal with some of these challenges around your fluctuating costs and the competitive pressures that you might be feeling, especially now that you're launching your season. Maybe it's turning out better than you thought. Maybe it's not as great as you thought. You're feeling the pressures. So whether you're struggling to adjust your prices in response to the rising costs, or how to articulate the value that you deliver to your customers, and also how you kind of weigh against your competitors in the market, we're going to dive into some solutions for you to understand today that you can apply in your company.
And one of the biggest challenges is that, once you understand your numbers and you understand why and how to price things, and letting go of the fact that the majority of, not only small business owners, but in the lawn care and landscape industry, but most small business owners are guessing on why they price certain things. They don't understand the hows and whys. So today we're going to go into how to understand cost and why, and all the 5 points to really stay competitive both in price, but also remain super profitable. So number 1 is understanding your cost.
Yeah. And we have different types of costs, right? And I think this is confusing for people. So we have direct costs and we have direct costs. And there's ways to connect these to calculate your job costs, right? How do you connect them? So let's unpack what direct cost means. So this includes labor, fuel, plants, material, and equipment usage. So anything that you are spending that's directly connected to that service that you're providing. Indirect costs, these are your overhead expenses such as rent, utilities, insurance for your business, any administrative, salaries, any office supplies. So these are what we call indirect costs. They are not directly supporting the service. They are indirectly supporting the service. So very easy. It's not as complicated and scary as it may sound at first. So these direct costs, these are the expenses that could attribute to a certain job, so a very specific job, and they vary depending on the nature or the scope of the work that you're providing. So, labor, wages paid to employees or contractors. And when you're looking at the labor, you want to make sure that you are including the taxes. So your employer taxes that you have to pay on behalf of your employees, your workers' compensation, which can be very pricey, these days, making sure that you're including that, including their paid time off or sick time if you have any. And you might even have other state or local taxes that you have to pay on behalf of these laborers working in your business. So you want to include all of that, which is what we call a labor burden. So now you know what a labor burden is. It's all those things that support your employee. And then we have the materials, plants, mulch, soil, seeds, fertilizer, all that stuff that you are using for that job, whether it's pavers, any concrete, anything like that. And then we have equipment usage. And this is one of the places that we have found creates one of the biggest bleeds in profitability in a company is y'all forget to include your equipment or equipment rental or anything like that in your pricing models. So this relates to the use of machinery or equipment directly on the job. And this can be calculated based on the depreciation or rental costs of this equipment.
So we have, for direct costs, we have labor. So what we're paying the people to do the work to get it done that we're billing. And in that labor, we have a labor burden, which is going to be, the matching that we're matching their payroll, their FICA, and their federal taxes, and also workers' comp, unemployment insurance. So we have to make sure that we understand our full labor burden. It's typically in the industry average, it's about 20%, 27%. So if you're paying someone $20 an hour, you have to add about 27% to that on average. And because it also includes paid time off. So $20 times 27% is going to be $5.40. So it's going to cost you $25.40 for every hour that they work, every hour that you're paying them. So whether they're actually working on a job or not, they're still costing you $25.40 if they're on your payroll. Next is materials. So plants, mulch, soil, seed, pavers, everything. And then also like the stuff that is kind of like throwaway things, sundries, spikes, even if we're using, marking tools or measuring cups and stuff, that's also considered, parts of material if you're only going to use it and for that job and then throw it away. And then the equipment use, which Christeen and I have found that this is where people are not charging enough for that. We have the payments. How long is that equipment going to last? We need to figure that out. So we're charging for that. And typically that's anywhere between $7 to $14 an hour for different types of pieces of equipment for every hour that runs, that piece of equipment runs. Those are the ranges that I'm finding. So those are direct costs.
Yes. And why don't you walk our audience through an example of a calculation that they would use for each job?
So an example calculation is if we have $200 for labor, $150 for materials, and equipment usage would be $50, right? So we use that for, let's say, the range is between 7 and 14. Let's say it's $10 an hour for this equipment. So we did 5 hours on the job. That's $50. So we have $200 is for labor costs, 150 is for materials, and 50 for equipment. So our total direct cost would be $400. And why is that important to know? We're going to go over that later, but it's really important to know what your direct costs are.
Yeah. So now let's talk about the indirect costs. What are those more specifically, and how are you going to calculate them? How do they impact and kind of coincide with your direct costs? So these indirect costs, again, like they're expenses that support the entire operation, but they're not directly linked to any specific job, right? You're just like, this is all the stuff I need to run my business, and this is how much it costs. So these are going to be your administrative expenses, so salaries for office staff, right? And again, this is going to include their taxes, their insurance, the workers' comp that you have to cover your office. So those types of things. So any cost that supports them working at your company, including their wage. Again, it is also called labor burden. So whether they're in the field or they're in the office, guess what? You have a labor burden for every employee that you have, and you even have one for yourself. So that's really good to figure out. And then we have, office supplies and other things that you may have in the office, like paper, ink, various things like that. Then we have marketing expenses, right? These are the costs associated with any sort of advertising, promotion, activities, anything like that. You want to track those. Those contribute to your company. So everybody knows who you are, what you do, who you serve, how you serve them, and you can get new customers. And then we have, the basics of utility, which could include electric, water, internet, trash, like anything like that supports your business premises. And you have, of course, insurance costs. So these are really the basic indirect costs. And what we want to do is we want to allocate these to each job on a fair and consistent method. So you want to understand, one, what are my indirect costs and what method are we going to consistently use to apply them to our jobs? So if a job takes 10% of the total labor hours in a month, then it should bear 10% of the monthly indirect costs, right? It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be hard. We can look at how many labor hours were in this month, what percentage of each job took up those labor hours for the total hours, and okay, we're going to apply our total indirect costs to those percentages. So very easy.
So another way to do that, to apply the indirect cost to your labor hours, is to know how many labor hours you're going to sell for the whole year and then divide it into that, right? So let's say we know our indirect cost is going to be $100,000 for the year based on last year's budget. And then we know we're going to sell, let's say, 10,000 hours for labor hours this year. So we're going to divide that 100,000 by the 10,000. So we know that we have $10 an hour that we have to charge just to recover our indirect cost for every one of those hours that we sell during the year.
Yes, an example could be you have a total monthly indirect cost of $1,000. So let's say in between, whatever rent you have, utilities. Of course, this is, very small scale to make it easy for us to calculate in our heads while we're, out on the job or driving, whatever we're doing. So $1,000 of indirect costs and the job share based on labor hours. Let's say this one job was 10%. So we're going to allocate $100 to that job of our indirect costs.
And so an example for that would be if we had our direct cost and we're going to add the direct cost and the allocated indirect cost for a total job cost. So if we have our direct cost at 400, and this is why it's important to know that, and then we'll get to it later in margins and markups, plus an allocated indirect cost of $100. Now the total job cost is $500 for that. So when we're pricing things out, we're not just guessing and winging it or charging X because Joey down the street charges X. So we're going to charge X plus or X minus. We're actually going to be charging based on our own costs.
Yes. Yeah. And I want to share, if you're not doing this, don't feel bad. Don't feel like, oh, I'm not succeeding. I should have known that or something like that. I'm going to share a little secret with you all. I'm in so many professional groups that are filled with accountants. They don't know this information either. So a lot of them that are out there, so even your accountants, very few of them are even tracking this for their business, even though they know that this is what you're supposed to do. So, they wing it. They say, well, we think it's this, right? Just like you do. And they're not taking that time to figure out what are our direct costs and our indirect costs and how does it tie to our pricing. So don't feel like, you're in a lane of your own there. There are professionals who know that they should be doing this, who know how to do it, who do not do it. So if you get this implemented in your company, you're going to be ahead of so many other business owners out there and so many other business owners in other industries in addition to your own.
Yeah, if you're doing this puts you in the top, I'm gonna say 5 to 10% of all businesses. So people can say, oh, these are my costs, this is my labor hour, this is my markup, this is my margin, indirect costs. I mean, you're talking a whole nother language that people are not even aware exists at so many different levels. But this is how businesses grow. People think, oh, how do I grow my business? Do I put more flyers out? Do I get an orange mower or a red mower? Nope. This is how to grow a business: knowing your numbers, being profitable, having the money to grow. Sure, flyers are part of marketing and the mowers are a part of efficiency, but it really doesn't matter what color your mowers are or your spreader sprayer is if you don't know this first. If you know this, then everything else lines up.
Yeah. And this really it gives you the insight that you need to set your prices that's going to cover your costs, to be intentional about generating that profit. And it ensures the business's financial health and long-term sustainability. So those companies that are out there bigger than you, that are growing, you think they look so, great out there, they may not even know this. And just by you knowing this, you can surpass them in your market.
And it's not uncommon for companies that are over $5 million to have a profit margin in this industry of about 4.5%. So that's barely surviving, 4.5%. So growth does not always mean profitability. That is for sure. But I mean, we also need to have a certain amount of revenue to live on and everything. But knowing your prices just gives you that. So when clients ask you, oh, can you drop your price, or that's too expensive? You're like, well, actually, that is the right price. And I know that because I know my numbers. And then you just move on to clients that are willing to pay you for what you're worth. But knowing this up front is so powerful.
Yeah. It is
All
a
right.
game changer.
It's a game changer. Yep. So step 2 is analyzing the competition. And how do you do that? Achieving profitability in lawn care and landscape businesses frequently requires dealing with competition. So we need a clear, comprehensive understanding of our market standing, attainable through several strategic evaluations.
Yeah. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to understand, what are my competitors charging, right? So what are they charging? You're going to research this. You can use online resources, industry publications. You could even have direct inquiries to gather information on pricing of competitors. I know that I gained insight. I had a client or a lead come to us, and he said, I'm going to be open with you. I'm also talking to this other company. And I was like, that's great. Thank you for sharing. I've heard of that company. So once we looked under their hood, we found that they left a ton of money on the table. He went with them because they were cheaper. In a later conversation, I found out he was extremely disappointed because they didn't do everything he wanted them to do, because there were too many hours in that job and they couldn't do it. But we knew that because he said, they're charging me this much, so I'm going to go with them. And it gave me the insight of what I knew it was really going to take from our end and what our costs were. So I could quickly calculate there is about $50,000 left on the table from that company. So once you know what your competitors are pricing and what they're delivering, you may not be driving around your market or your neighborhood thinking that they look so great. So you
Right.
can see the dollars just being left on the lawns, right, and in their yards. So that's one thing, right? Know what your competitors or your market, people in your market, are pricing, and whatever you do, don't price like they do. Okay, so
No. Because they're not doing the math. They're winging it. They're absolutely winging it. So don't price like them. So some of the ways to do the research is you can do surveys of competitors' prices. You can ask other people what they're paying. You can go online, industry publications. You can get direct inquiries. You can ask them for prices. And or you can talk to your customers or client or current or past clients and see what they're paying. And then also identify if they have pricing tiers. So if your competitors offer different pricing tiers and what features are included in each one. So sometimes there's the mow, blow, and go guy, right? he's not doing nice edging. He's not catching any grass. They're just going as fast as they can. They're getting out and barely blowing off the debris, and they're gone. And not everybody wants that. They don't care about lines. So that's one price. There's another price if you want straight lines. There's nice string trimming done. Everything is nice and clean when they leave. Some guys will charge more and they'll weed whack. They'll just weed whack everywhere. Any cracks that have any kind of weeds in them, they'll do that tilt and have that vertical edge on the beds and stuff. So there's a difference between a mow and blow guy and someone that's taking the time. So those are, even though the prices are different, the service offering is not. So you might have a mow and blow price, mow, blow and go, and you might have a more detailed price. Same thing with landscaping. You might have different offerings. So when someone says, "Oh, I'm doing pavers for $15 a foot," what does that mean? There's more questions. Well, what's the base look like, and what's the edging look like, and what's the paver, and what's the warranty, and what's the grade, and all that. Do they fix everything when they're done? There's all kinds of tiers. So just trusting a price that we hear is we need to be more curious. And then also analyzing the service offerings. So list the service offerings you have. So what do you do? And then list what your competitor does. And know any unique services or value added features that differentiate each business. And that's what you want to highlight when you're in your marketing and your sales. You want to highlight the differentiation. And then the value proposition is after you evaluate your services against your competitors to identify your own unique value proposition. This could be specialized services, superior customer service, or sustainable products like, native. We focus on native plantings or, sustainability, right? So organic fertilizers. And you want to make sure that you're focusing on what makes you different and using that in your value proposition and not just price.
Yeah. And highlight that, right? Because it's going to really show the customers that you're talking to what's different about you and why they should go with you, even if you do price, much higher, if it's 30% or 40% higher than your competitor, right? There's going to be things that matter to them. And that's getting to know who your customer is in your market.
Yes. And I shared on a webinar we recently had, as far as like this, offering mowing on Thursday and Friday. People will pay more for those dates, or you should be charging more for Thursday and Friday mowing because that's the premium day of the week. It should have a different value sometimes than Monday. And I know a lot of people will do their commercial accounts on Monday and Tuesday, and then they do the residential later in the week. But if, we've had clients that we charged a premium for Friday. If Friday was full and you wanted to get in there, it was a premium, and they didn't care. It meant more to them that they could tell their spouse, "Hey, the lawn's getting cut on Fridays. It's going to look great for the weekends," than them saving $5. It was totally worth it for them. All right. Step 3 is determining your pricing strategy.
Yeah, and pricing strategy is something, that we don't always talk about, right? We talk about price and we talk about, well, what contributes to price, and there's different ways that you can price. So when with these pricing models, there's a couple, different pros and cons of these, and we have hourly rates, we have project-based pricing, and value pricing. And these are, just kind of like the basic pricing models, right? So hourly rates, they ensure for payment for the time spent on the job, but they can penalize efficiency, right? So if you're like, okay, we're going to charge you, for this job, we think it's going to take 3 to 5 hours. You go out there, it takes 3. You're not making as much money, and you just lost revenue on those 2 hours because your field people are really efficient and they're good and they know what they're doing. And then we have project-based pricing. So this encourages efficiency and is preferred for larger one-time jobs. So, in that last example I used, you can say, okay, well, we're going to price it at, let's say $500, which is 5 hours, and your guys get it done in 3. Your average hourly delivery time just went up. So if you, average that 3 hours of delivery, 5 hours of revenue, right? You just made a higher profitability. So I love project-based pricing. I've talked to some clients where they've done it and they have made some beautiful, beautiful profit margins, which I'm very proud of them for doing that. So they figured that out. And then we have, talking about the hourly versus project-based pricing. So for hourly pricing, we charge a set rate for hour per work. And this is straightforward, but may not always accurately provide the value. It doesn't provide the perceived value in that job. And the project-based pricing, so it's charging a flat rate for the entire project. And this requires, the challenge here is it really requires accurate estimates. So you have to know from historical information, ideally, how much it should take for this job to get done. And it could be more appealing to customers because they know I'm going to pay X amount and this job is going to get done. But you need to make sure that you're basing it off of, true facts. Like this is going to take this much. We know it, whether it's based off of, industry standards, and you have some really good data on that, or you've been doing it for so long that you know.
Yeah, all of these pricing strategies have advantages and challenges. I wouldn't say disadvantages, but each one, like if you're going to do project based, like Christeen said, you have to know your production rates. Hourly can be a little bit safe if you don't know what you're getting into, but also limits the profitability involved in it. And as as your team becomes more efficient, you become more efficient. So you're giving that your learned efficiency kind of away in some of the hourly fees, and sometimes you do get into projects that you're like, this is just, we don't know what's in there or under there. And sometimes one of the things that I've used is allowances for different things. Like if we're doing excavation and we don't know what's under there, we're saying excavation, you're allowed up to a day. But if we get it done in half a day, we get paid the allowance amount. But if it goes past that day, then we charge more. So that's another type of strategy for that. But being aware of like where you are, even in the marketplace, what are the other people and how are they charging, and differentiating yourself a little bit around that. Because the more you are like everybody else, the more difficult it is to get paid really what you want to get paid. The more you line up with everybody else, you become simply a commodity. So understanding how to price and base your pricing models is super important, and having a strategy after you do your analyzing the competition step too.
Yeah. And another pricing model is value-based pricing. So this is based off of perceived value, right? And this is one of my favorites because as a pumpkin plan strategist, going through the process of really knowing who your ideal customers are and then targeting that market and just really getting into the sweet spot of your business, you can price with a value-based price. And what you're doing is you're understanding your ideal customer's perception of how they value the services that you deliver. So you know what they need, what they want, what they prefer, what the problems are, the language that they speak, all these things, and you can charge a higher price based on that perceived value. So you price your services based on this perceived value to the customer rather than just the cost to deliver the services. Now, you need to know the cost to deliver those services, right? But then you can really control that profit margin because you're saying, okay, this is what we charge and this is what we have to pay. And this is, the beautiful profit margin between that. So this might mean higher prices for services that are highly valued or unique to your market, kind of like Steve was saying, mowing on, Fridays, right? You might live in an area to where people spend a lot of time outside in the summer and they want that lawn to look nice, on the weekend. The other one that we have is tiered pricing. So this offers packages and levels of service at different price points. So catering to different customers' needs and budgets. So this creates different service packages per tier, and each of them has features. So, it's the good, better, best concept. Like if you have lawn application, you have good, better, best. So the tiers should cater to different customers' needs and budgets. So if you're looking at your ideal customer and you're saying, well, they're not all alike, but they pretty much need this. Some of them want a little bit more, some of them want a little less. So it gives you that option. And this can attract a broader base, which allows customers to choose the level of service they want, which could allow you to fill in that route a lot thicker, and have a higher profit margin on that route. Core Growth Strategies provides business growth management solutions through cloud accounting, bookkeeping, and strategic business consulting programs. Our team works with small businesses in lawn care and landscape and trade industries throughout the U.S. We increase our clients' business acumen by creating business performance transparency through financials and strategic advisement based on industry best practices and benchmarks. Our experienced team provides support, guidance, and coaching, thereby allowing our clients to connect with viable data and discover their own solutions. Core Growth Strategies programs and services are designed to get your business from where it is now to where you have always dreamed it to be. Visit us today at coregrowthstrategies.com and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Don't miss our exclusive limited time podcast special. Just mention promo code GPA Pro to any member of our team during your complimentary consultation, or enter the promo code on our site when you sign up for one of our online programs. That's promo code GPA Pro.
Yeah, and by having the different packages, maybe you have 3 or 4 people that are buying the best package, but you can fill it in with someone, you fill that route in so it's tighter with someone that has a lesser package, right? So good, better, and best. So if you have 4 people on a street that are buying the best, maybe you can have a good client in there, as long as it's not going to hurt your brand, and to fill in that route. So having those tiered offerings is very common, and people love packages. Who doesn't love a package, right? I mean, nobody wants to buy one thing. Nobody goes to a restaurant and like, okay, I'll have, I guess unless it's a really high-end steakhouse, right? I'll have my steak. Oh, okay, now let me see. I'll have my side, this side, that side, drinks and everything. No, they charge you by the dinner. You know what I mean? Typically 90% of restaurants are like, okay, you get to choose, it's $25. You get the steak, it's 2 sides and a salad and a drink or something like that. Packaging, people love it. And a lot of these fixed menus are very popular, right? Where you're getting your dinner and your dessert and your drink. People sell a lot more product when you have packages. Packages are just an awesome thing. And the other thing, it locks people in, like, hey, you know what? Mowing is this, but if you buy the spring cleanup, the mowing, the fall cleanup, and the 2 shrub trimmings, we can also, I hate discounts. I wouldn't discount. We can also do this, like, right? We're going to bring you, we'll install flat of flowers in the spring for you, and 6 mums or something in the fall. Have that value add, because these people honestly are a lot of our clients, $20, $50, $100. That's just annoying to them I get a $25 discount. Thank you very much. But, you're going to put, flowers in that I can come home and look at every day, day after day. When people say how nice the flowers look, I can say, well, my landscape company put them in, right? That is going to be a lot more valuable to them, to us, and their community than $25 or $50. So, I really love, locking people up, but giving them a reward for that. So love the, any type of bundling that we can do.
Yeah, and that ties into the subscription model, which was our last pricing model that we wanted to share. So, this is where you could get your customers to pay a reoccurring fee, like typically monthly or annually. And it's a regular service. Maybe it's like lawn maintenance. Steve was saying, lawn maintenance this time of year, we treat your, fall and spring cleanup. Then, we'll plant flowers. So you can kind of create an offering with the subscription model, which you could also use a tiered pricing model in, right? Good, better, best with the subscription model, to where they just pay this ongoing fee and they continue to pay it until they cancel. So it's not a year after year after year type of renewal, but it is a subscription to where they pay till they say, no, I think we're done, or we want to go down a tier or up a tier. So I love this model because it gives you that predictable reoccurring revenue, and a really great, key performance indicator in any company, if you have this opportunity to create, is how much reoccurring revenue do we have every year, right? So that's the low hanging fruit. We don't have to work very hard for that. People are just already signed up.
Yeah, and reoccurring revenue is very interesting on the landscape install side, because years ago I used to think, well, I put the patio in, how much more patio can you put in, But what we found was, and we're finding now actually in my landscape businesses, we put the patio in, now they want an outdoor kitchen. Or we put the patio in the outdoor kitchen, now they want a living room, like a whole separate area. Or, we redo the front steps and the front sidewalk. So there's a portion, even if you're focusing on install, there's a portion of your existing clientele that should be presenting you with reoccurring revenue opportunities. And how do you do that? By staying in contact, letting them know, suggesting things on how to improve it. So for lawn applications, which is my main business, it's reoccurring revenue, right? It's 85% reoccurring revenue. But for landscaping, there's definitely a percentage of your client base that's going to offer reoccurring revenue opportunities.
Yeah, and this is what you're kind of talking about, Steve, is the pricing strategy. So developing a strategy for your pricing, like ongoing. So one of them is you want to, evaluate these pricing models. You want to look at which one works best for you in the different services you have in your company, right? Establish those. I wouldn't say do them all at once, do one at a time, right? Just start with one and move through them. And then you want to choose that pricing model that aligns with your strengths in your business. So, which one leverages your business strengths and value proposition from what you're doing, your business model, your services that you're providing, who you serve. And then you want to maintain that transparency with your customers. So clearly communicate your pricing structure, clearly communicate the value to your pricing and the quality that you offer and who you serve. And you can even share the type of customers that you serve, right? Because people like to feel important. They like to feel different. And if you're saying, yeah, we only serve, customers who are, that hardworking type of people who want their lawn and their landscape to look beautiful because they are busy dedicating time to their family and their profession, right? And then they're like, oh, well, that's me, right? That's my lifestyle. So it really acknowledges them. And then they say, and that's my landscaper. So another thing you want to do is you want to regularly review and adjust these. So you don't want to just set a price. Pricing is never set it and forget it. It's, looking into, has the market changed? What do we need to do to adapt? Are there, things that our customers are saying that we need to listen to? So what are those things? And, do you have to adjust for price increases, for your cost increases as well? So I would say do that one time a year, at least, ideally every quarter.
Yes, at least a quarter, just so you have a pulse on it, so it doesn't get away from you. There's definitely, sometimes it's easier to keep a pulse on things or keep with the pulse as opposed to making huge corrections later on. Huge corrections take a lot of time and effort.
Yeah.
And energy.
It does.
All right. Next is setting profitable markups and margins.
Yeah. And this is, I feel like this is another area where business owners can really get confused. And when they get confused, they think that they're doing everything right. So they're putting in all that effort, which is unfortunate when it kind of gets lost in translation of like, oh, well, I didn't realize that margin was this and markup was that. And they'll, get it confused, or they'll think it's the same thing. And then they're losing profit, or they'll fix it and then they'll go back to the way that they did it before. So I think this is a very important topic to talk about to control your costs and your pricing in your business.
So we need to distinguish between markup and margin. Different words. I hate the fact that they sound so closely related because I think that's where some of the confusion is. So markup works like this. If something is $100 and we're going to mark it up to $200, right? We have 100% markup, but only 50% margin. And why is it 50% margin, right? Because we have $100 markup to $100. Now it gives us $200. We have to subtract out the cost of the object, right? Or what we're selling, which is $100. So, and then we divide it by the sales price. It's hard to get all this across on a podcast. So you're going to take $100 if you paid for the plant, you're going to mark it up to $200. That's 100% markup, but you have to subtract out the cost, right? And then divide it by the total sales. So that gives you a 50% margin. It's really hard to talk about this on a podcast and get it clear, but practice this. I have a cheat sheet for it. We have it in our toolbox, Green Profit Academy toolbox. But the markup is added to your direct cost to cover your overhead and profit. It's super important. And to calculate a markup, decide on the percentage of profit you want to aim to achieve above the job cost. For instance, if the direct cost is $100 and you aim for a 20% profit, gross profit, your markup would be 20% of the selling price. So it'd be $120. It's calculated as markup percentage equals selling price minus cost divided by cost times 100. If you got all that, you will give you a worksheet on how to do this in the show notes. Consider the market research, competitive prices, and customers' expectations. Your markup needs to be competitive, yet sufficient to sustain your business. So in other words, you have to have enough markup to have enough profitability to stay in business and continue to grow.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just kind of want to share, like, we're using the $100 plus the 20% to make it really easy. That's not what we're suggesting that your markup should be, right? So
Yeah, we're not suggesting
we are
that.
not that at all. It's
No,
just
no.
that you can compute it in your head while we're kind of going through this. It's $100 and you aim to make 20% profit, then your markup would be 20%, making your selling price $120. Okay. So you're adding 20% to that. So what we're doing is we're taking the selling price of $100, whatever the cost is. So we're minusing the cost, dividing the cost, multiplying it by 100, and that equals our markup percentage. So we're just trying to keep it real simple so you can follow along easily as you're listening.
Yes. So gross margin, which is different than markup, right? Gross margin is the percentage of each sale that exceeds the cost of the goods sold. So what's cost of goods sold, right? It's going to be labor. It's going to be material. It's also the equipment that we use to produce that. So a lot of times people are thinking of margin only in like, I'm going to buy a plant for this. I mark it up to that. But we also have to have margin on labor, material, and equipment. So the percentage of gross margin is the percentage of each sale that exceeds the cost of the goods sold, which is in this context is the direct cost of providing the service. So, right, how do we provide the service? Labor, material, and equipment. It's calculated as margin is calculated as a percentage equals total revenue. So what we charged for that job minus the cost of the goods sold divided by the revenue times 100. And we'll provide this formula for you in some form, and you need to practice this. I have a cheat sheet that I developed that just helps me to quickly figure out what margin percentages I want. Our goal for my company is 65%. So that's what we know. So we know our markup to get 65% is 286% or a multiplier of 2.86. So for profit goals, it's crucial to set a target profit margin for every service offered and align your pricing strategy with industry benchmarks. And here's a few tips on how to do this. Profit goals should be based on the business goals, cost, industry benchmarks, decide on the desired profit margin for each service. This margin should cover all your costs and leave a satisfactory profit. So we even want a higher gross profit margin in snow plowing because A, it's an emergency business. Like we don't know when it's going to snow, how much, how long people are going to work. So we have to, be more prepared and ready for it. And you might have some items that are less than 65%. They might be 60% or 55%. But the goal is to have an overall company margin for us of 65%. Service differentiation. Consider setting different profit margins for various services based on the value to the customers and unique offerings that might justify higher margins. So that Friday mowing or pet-friendly weed controls, or, we'll do different types of edging and prep for you on your lawn. Also, industry standards. Research industry benchmarks for profit margins in the lawn care and landscape sector. This information can also be found through industry associations, business publications, consultations with financial advisors. And they have state of the industry that they'll put out through some of these industry magazines that are very helpful. But, if everyone else is trying to get a 50, 65% margin and you're at 40%, I call it 40% gross profit margin, the smoke alarm. Because once you drop below 40%, your company is on fire. It is not, it's going to burn up pretty quickly. And I've had people argue that with me, and then they're out of business within 2 years. It's just the math. Because if you have below 40% gross profit margin and you're shooting for a 15% net, 15 minus the 40% leaves you 25% to cover all of your indirect costs and overhead. And that's just and owner's salary. And that's just not enough when you're below that, when you're especially below 40%. But when you're below 50%, you really will start to feel the crunch. Do a competitor analysis. Analyze your competitors' pricing strategy to gauge the average market margins, and then this can help identify what customers are willing to pay in the market, what the market rate is for similar services. And sometimes, somebody needs to set the new market rate. You can be a leader in a certain market or a certain level of quality. Maybe some of you remember how they used to rent out videotapes, right? When that was a thing, you would rent it out by the day. And then a company came along and said, no, we'll rent it out for 3 days. And then another company came out and said, no, you just rent it. And then when you're done with it, put it in the mail and we'll send you another one and keep it as long as you want. So that's just an example of it's not always price-based. They just changed the length that they were keeping it. So you can just change a few things and be different in your marketplace. And that allows you to be a more recognized expert.
Yeah. And, one of the things I kind of want to share on this is with their gross margin and their markup calculation. And Steve is absolutely right. Practice, right? And we've worked with clients on this to where they're like, I don't even know where to begin. I don't know what a labor burden is. Can you guys help us figure this out? And we've helped several clients around, pricing strategy and getting their pricing right. And we actually have a program that we came up with. It's a triage path where we work with you specifically on the biggest pain point in your business. So Steve has done coaching with some of these, clients to really help them get their pricing right, which pays for their coaching or their triage path like 100 or more times over. I mean, it's just insane how much, money they're losing because their margins and their markups aren't right and they're not considering everything. I can do a profit first assessment. And just by looking at that assessment, I can see, especially if it's our scalable growth business model assessment, where the bleed is in the company. I can go, okay, they're not charging enough for labor. They have too much labor. Their equipment isn't being considered, or they have too much equipment. Something's off here. So or their margins are off on their materials or all of the above, but I can see the bleed instantly just by looking at it. And Steve has that insight too, to where he can look at it and, see these things. So we can get that bleed fixed moving forward to where it's your biggest pain point in your company. If it's cash flow, it's typically tied to what we're talking about right here on this podcast. And it is fixable, absolutely fixable in a very short amount of time.
It is. It is, and paying paying for coaching consultation is the idea for that is so it pays for itself. It never actually costs you any money. And typically, just getting the pricing right and getting your margins and markups dialed in, that's a forever thing. So you get that figured out once, and that's going to pay dividends for the rest of your career, right? Because now you have the tools on how to make sure that you're getting paid right and you're charging for the right things. And typically people are not as far off as they think they are. Typically they're anywhere between 7 to 20% off, which means, on $100 property, now you're at $20, $120. So you raised it $20, and then your price is right. Or sometimes it could be as little as $7 per visit, but multiply that times, hundreds or thousands of visits, and that has a big impact. But you need to know why and how. And some people are not even charging for their equipment. They're paying for it out of their own pocket and giving that to their customers. So, just figure out your profit needs and then aligning that with your margins and markups. It's a game changer. I mean, that's how my business changed. That's how I went from being $250,000 in debt and struggling to getting out of debt and then growing a multi-million-dollar landscape business because I understood margins and markups.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking to me with the amount of businesses that I've worked with and even, some that I haven't, right? To where it's like I took a look under the hood and I saw these things and they decided not to make these changes. But the slow death of their company and the amount of stress that they are carrying around or losing sleep over is really over pocket change, right? Just like imagine $7 or $20 in your wallet. And that is what is making the difference of whether your business is profitable or not based on per service charge. And that's it. That's as simple as it is.
And I'll go back to kind of talking about how these companies, how you have highly profitable companies or companies that grow and are still highly profitable. These are the conversations you're talking about, margins and markups, and how meeting profit goals. And so they put the time in to get in shape financially and with their financial education, to have these highly profitable companies. And, I met someone at a trade show a few years ago. I said, "How was your year?" He said, "Oh, we had a great year. We bought 2 dump trucks and a hydro seeder." And, he was judging his year on how much equipment he was buying. And then, he didn't make it 5 years because he thought business looked like lots of equipment. Then you were successful. And I was under the assumption that as long as I knew about soil and fertilizer and dump trucks and mowers and, fertilizer spreaders and all that I would have a successful lawn care business. Well, it got me up to a certain point, but it was not helping me to achieve my financial goals and needs. Matter of fact, I was digging a hole financially. And then once I understood my financials, balance sheets, profit and loss statements, margins and markups, that is what led me to where my company is today.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a little thing that can change everything. So I don't want a business owner, to pull $7 out of their pocket to buy a hot dog one day and go, this could have been the game changer in my business, is just charging this much more.
Yep.
So the last one that we're going to kind of go over today is regularly reviewing and adjusting prices, right? So it's like you understand what your direct and indirect costs are. You understand, what you're charging your customer now because you're basing it off of your costs. You've looked at your pricing strategies. Now that you've had this all built out, you want to review it and you want to adjust it. You want to set up kind of like this rhythm and this habit of it's not just to set it and forget it. Let's just go revisit it every once in a while, right? And I talked earlier about this. I said, ideally, at least once a year, people, please, once a year, right? End of the year, let's review your pricing to plan for this next year that's coming. best case scenario, if you have all your systems built in, you can review this quarterly. You can look at what are our gross profit margins, where's opportunity, are we paying for more, let's adjust this. So that way you're not taking it in the pants every quarter after quarter, and then at the year you're going, oh man, if we would have just bumped that up $5, our profit margin would have been here. So we want that continuous evaluation. So we want to establish a routine of pricing review. So whatever that is, get it set up quarterly, biannually, whatever it is, make sure you're setting down and you're looking at these fluctuating costs and what's impacting the direct costs and indirect costs of your business and how it ties to your pricing. The other thing you want to do is you want to monitor costs and market changes, right? So you're going to track these things, take notice of them to both your direct and indirect costs, so that when you do sit down and you make that pricing change, already, okay, our materials costs have gone up, or, we had to shift gears because the labor market's so tough and we had to bump our labor rates up because we needed people that actually had some quality and knew what they were doing. So, being aware of those fuel prices change, whatever that is. So you want to keep your finger on the pulse of industry trends, things that are changing in your market, maybe things that are changing with your customers, your competition, and keep those pricings, in line with whatever your market demand is. And then you want to continue to solicit and analyze customer feedback. So what are they saying? Maybe they're saying they want you to do more of something or less of something, or this has high value, or that does, or we wish you guys would just do this. That would be great. So then you can, take some action and analyze if this feedback is worth implementing versus just making an assumption. Oh, these guys are saying this, let's go do it. Well, sit down and have a thought on it, because you don't want to do it and then find out you're losing profitability in your company. So that's very common. Us entrepreneurs, we jump to conclusions quite a bit and we make assumptions. So slow down and think about it and analyze it. And then, the last one here is transparency. So communicating again with your customers about these price adjustments. We have in our toolbox, I think it's our membership toolbox, we have this in. It's a very simple explanation and outline that's positive and puts the customer first on why you're making these pricing adjustments, and you're making it about your customer and the value that you want to continue to provide for them to keep your customers satisfied and loyal. So there's some great strategies that you can pull in here.
Yes. So in conclusion, listen to this podcast maybe twice to get everything that we talked about. There's a lot going on here. So to recap, thoroughly understand all the direct and indirect costs associated with the services you're providing. It's worth taking the time to do that. Actively monitor your market trends, pay attention to what's going on around you and how prices change and shift. Things are different post-COVID. Man, has the price world changed, and people's mindsets haven't caught up to the new prices that we are in 2023, that now in 2024. Many people are in 2018-19 pricing. It's just a new world. I mean, I was reading an economic report. Most prices have at least doubled since 2013, at least. And some have tripled. So some are up between 300 and 400%. Develop and implement strategies for pricing models that reflect the value to your clients and to your community, and balance that when it's available. Remain flexible with your pricing adjustments and think about that quarterly and paying attention to that. And so a lot of times in the spring, people will lose clients because there's somebody that's offering cheaper. Let the cheap guys fill up, and then get your full price as the spring goes on into the summer. But, just stay flexible with your pricing and then incorporate the principles that allow for navigating competitive landscape effectively, ensuring that your business remains profitable and poised for growth. Because it takes money to grow. And that's the other thing. How do companies grow? A lot of times people say, why am I stuck at the same place I've been for 6 years? And because they don't have the money to grow. And the reason they don't have the money to grow is because they don't have these tools implemented. So they don't have the financial acumen to make the money for the growth. So let's just get that fixed. We can fix that in a short period of time so you can start getting the money and the growth. It's very frustrating for people. And I understand that because I had been there. I was there, right? So it's just one of those things. And this is the way to move your company and your goals and your income forward.
And we're going to have a link in the show notes for you who are out there listening and you want to dive into this and learn a little bit more. There's a link that supports this process that will help bring you through it. So you don't have to remember everything. You can just go through, that checklist that we'll provide. And so if you're wanting more of this and you're wanting, to implement into your business, please click on that link and download that tool.
And I would say that, click on the link, download the tool. Working with Christeen and I, one of the biggest advantages that I feel is we've both been there. I've been through this. I'm 41 years in this industry. I know the language. I know the challenge, the struggle. I know how difficult it is. It's a hard way to make a hard living. I found a way easier way. So there's a huge advantage to working with people that have been there, done that, and are willing and eager to help people find the way.
Yep.
So thank you for joining us, and join us on the next podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with your friends.
Thanks for listening to the Green Profit Academy Pros Podcast,
the show that digs into the challenges of growing a lawn care and landscape business while maximizing your profit.